Welcome to the Strategy and Leadership Podcast, brought to you by SME Strategy. My name is Anthony Taylor, and I'm going to be your host today. On the Strategy and Leadership Podcast, we interview senior leaders and thought leaders to get their best practices for leading teams, for driving and executing strategy, and other best practices as it relates to leadership and team development. And our goal here on the Strategy and Leadership Podcast is to bring you practical and executable tips that you can use right away to support the growth of your organization or your business. So if you enjoy today's episode, please be sure to subscribe. You can follow us on YouTube for other bonus content on strategy and leadership, and you can join in on the conversation on Facebook in the Strategy and Leadership community. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's episode. Today, I'm joined by Chuck Swoboda, who is the president of Cape Point Advisors and the innovator in residence at Marquette University. Chuck, how are you today?
I'm doing great, and thanks for having me.
I am super excited to chat with you. I'm going to let you tell your story of what it was like in your previous career. Now you're an author of The Innovator Spirit, Discovering the Mindset to Pursue the Impossible. But tell our listeners a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are now, and if you had a claim to fame, what would it be?
I'm an engineer by training, took a job in Silicon Valley in the late 80s when I went to work for what at the time was the cool company, Hewlett Packard. Nobody thinks that anymore, but it was as cool as Google in the day. And was out there for about 4 years when I met these guys at a small startup in North Carolina who had invented the world's first blue LED. And it took a number of visits to convince me to join them. But at some point, I quit my good job at HP and went to join a startup in North Carolina and spent 25 years at Cree. When I got there, we had about $6 million in revenue and 30 employees. And I think right before I left, we made it to over $1.6 billion in revenue and 7,000 employees. And so I got to see all facets of the life of a company, but more importantly, what it was like to try to have a strategy of innovation when you're small, which is relatively easy, to when you get big, which actually turned out to be a lot harder than I thought. And in fact, so I kind of went through a full cycle. I learned to be very innovative and a risk taker. And by the end, after running a public company for a long time, which I did for over 16 years, it starts to wear you down and you start to almost go back to all that management thinking I thought I was going to avoid when I joined it.
Is there a thing called Innovators Fatigue?
Not really. I would say that what I'm doing in my second career, as an author and working at Marquette and doing my consulting, I'm as into innovation now as I ever was. In fact, I probably more so because what happens when you're running a public company, at some point, you have to take care of the stakeholders, and the shareholders come first. They get to decide if you keep your job. And what I found in that moment was at some point, it's really hard to be. Once you're successful as a public company, it's very hard to not be held accountable to that next quarterly success milestone. You're kind of boxed in. And so it was actually harder to be innovative at the end at my time at Cree than it was since I left, when now that's kind of free. But no, innovators fatigue, never had it. I'm still looking for different problems every day. And that's what gets me up in the morning. And that's what keeps me up at night.
I got that. So let's look at those two things. You changed your job, you moved into a startup. Obviously, there's like an innovation paradigm or just a way you approach innovation as a startup, which is assuming that you have like a product market fit. You're still trying to get validation. You're trying to get it to that point. And then, if you are in a larger organization, potentially what are the opportunities and what are the constraints around innovation? So maybe take us through that path of, 30 employees and then like across as you've grown and what the lessons learned along the way.
Sure. One of the things for me is I actually, I thought I was a pretty big risk taker and I thought I was a bit of an innovator when I left Hewlett Packard. But when I got to Cree, I realized that I had a lot to learn. My first day on the job, I walk in and the way they introduce you to a job in a startup is they go, well, here's your office. And it's an empty office with 3 boxes on the floor. And it's your chair, it's your O'Sullivan desk, and it's your O'Sullivan bookcase. And the goal is, well, the next couple hours, you have to put all that together and then we'll have a meeting. And so basically it was like, if you can't put together your own desk, you don't want to be here. And that's kind of gets you in this frame of mind of what it's like to be in this hands-on environment. And then I remember at lunch, I met with my boss. He said, well, it's great to have you here. So I need to tell you something, that one customer we had that was really driving all the revenue for the company, they canceled all their orders last month. So we don't have any orders anymore, and I need you to go get some. So I'm sitting there thinking, I just moved across the country, left my wife, my young daughter, my wife who's pregnant with our next child in Colorado, waiting to sell the house. There's no reload package when you join a startup. And I joined a company that no longer has any customers, and the job description is go find them. It's like, I don't. So, I mean, that is an everyday experience. And so what happens is what I realized, and I didn't realize this, by the way, until, honestly, I didn't realize much of this until I actually walked away from the job and I could reflect on it. But we didn't really have a process or something. Innovation was a mindset. It was about how people think and how they approach it. And really our key was we had this culture, and we were really cautious and intentional about finding people that wanted to be in that environment and then building upon that. So in the early days, more problems than you could ever solve. It was kind of survival mode. It's kind of easy to take risk because it's all upside. It's when nothing's working, it's not hard to take risk. Yeah, like, okay, let's just try something, because if we don't do it, we're going out of business anyways. As you grow, two things happen. One, the organization gets more complex. And so you start to fall into some challenges where you're having to recruit in expertise to help you run the business. So innovators, it's very much a leadership mindset. Take on any problem. You can react, adjust, adapt. But you don't tend to like a lot of structure or process. But as the organization gets more complicated, there's a reason larger organizations have structure and process. That's how you manage it. And so we started to see some of that tension between kind of this leadership mindset and what I'll call the management approach. And we did fine up until about $1 billion. It was slowly becoming more management driven, but still really leadership centric. And then as we went for the second $1 billion, and my goal the whole time was I kept wanting to run Cree like a giant startup. Well, somewhere between 1 and 2 billion, that kind of broke. And we started to miss some quarters, and we had missed them before, but the problems were bigger because the company was bigger. And so to solve it, we brought in a lot of expertise to really, subject matter experts. And what they did is it really started to shift the dynamic from one that was taking risk, making big bets, to let's limit risk. Let's hedge our bets. And everyone started to get focused on, I want to hit my quarterly goal more than I want to hit a home run. And the fact is that, if you want to use the baseball analogy, most home run hitters strike out a lot because you're not going to hit it out. And so the problem is we turned ourselves into singles hitters, which is a great way to run a company. But if you look at the last 5 years, we were much less innovative than at the beginning, to the point where our last big innovative product we did while I was there is we did in secret. We took a team, put them in a warehouse, didn't tell anyone else. And in a year in secret, they developed the Cree LED light bulb. And we didn't even tell the other employees because we knew they would kill the product.
So and I don't know if the Cree LED light bulb was like the big innovation. You did it in spite. I don't know if that was but was that done in spite of the rest of the team? And you say, hey, we're going to do this.
Yeah, that's a great question. In spite of is maybe it's the right connotation, maybe not the exact right word. But yeah. So what happened was we had a commercial lighting business, and these guys were great. And commercial lighting, there's a ton of things the customer cares about in terms of the reliability. We were giving a 10-year warranty on a light. So the process and the controls to make that happen were really important. But you have this LED light bulb, and while it's probably not our biggest innovation, it was our most famous. It's one everyone knows about because it was a consumer product. And in that situation, what happened was I saw the product. Originally, we weren't even going to do it. I'd said we would never make a light bulb. But since we couldn't convince any of our customers to make an LED light bulb, a scientist shows up at my office one day and goes, I know you said not to work on this, but I got to show you something. And he has a prototype of an LED light bulb. So when I mean this literally, we were not supposed to be, my orders were, we're not working on a consumer product. We don't know anything about this. We just don't have the expertise to get into this business. And he goes, yeah, I know you said that, but I did it anyways. So when I realized we wanted to go do it, what I looked at is I said the organization that was running this $1 billion plus company was going to try to control this very loose idea. And then in their desire to do the right thing, they were going to stifle what it was going to take. So we were going to basically invent an LED light bulb that we had a prototype but really didn't know how to make it. We were going to sell a consumer product. We'd never been in consumer products business. We were going to get into retail. We'd never done that before. And when we did this, we were actually going to make all of our customers really mad because essentially we'd be competing with them. So you're going, wow, there could be, the organization could have easily killed it. So when we put them in the secret team, the idea was get rid of all their boundary conditions. I would meet with the leader of the team. And by the way, it was one of the former Cree founders went and took this team with another one of the early scientists and 3 or 4 handpicked people. And the goal was just figure it out. Update me every 2 weeks, but just figure it out. And by the way, if you don't, we're just going to kill this thing. And by the way, they would have expected that if it didn't work, they weren't going to stay with the company. So it wasn't like a neat R&D project. It's like, no, guys, you got to go make this happen. You have a year. And if it doesn't happen, we're shutting this thing down and probably not anything for you guys to do in the rest of the company. And so I think it just created a really unique environment and let them break a whole bunch of rules, essentially. And for me, was it risky? Yeah, I would tell you that while the employees didn't know, my board knew. So what we did early on is we pitched the idea to the board. And most boards would probably say don't do it, but this is one of those times when you realize how a good board can really help you. One of my board members was a guy named Bob Tillman. And Bob was the man who took Lowe's Home Improvement from a small local North Carolina chain into Home Depot's biggest competitor. So he knew that space. And when we showed him the prototype, he said, you guys got to do this. I'm just telling you, if someone walked into my office when I was running Lowe's, I would take that product and run with it. It's a category changer. So kind of the secret weapon was we had a board member who kept telling the other board members, just don't worry about this. This is a great idea. We had no idea how to make money at it. In fact, in the beginning, we were losing money on every one we sold, but it just the pieces came together and it was really a group of people that were willing to take a big bet. And I think that's part of it, right? It's just it's a different mindset. And so we took out all the people without that mindset from the process.
I'm fighting every urge to use a light bulb moment pun, but here we are. And you know what? So as I was talking about that, so I want to ask you of the balance between invention and innovation. I also heard that you you reinvented the business sort of in spite of itself and in spite of a really bunch of good reasons. Maybe why, or more precisely, why not to do the thing? So like the pros outweighed the cons in that case. One of the questions I had was, how did you get the buy-in for it when there's all those things stacked against you? And then you have the protection from the board, but also the board vision, which to me stands that you've looked at developing a culture of innovation already, and that the culture sort of superseded the systems you put in place. So the culture actually overran the system, which was the trump card, which is great because that's what you want out of the board. And then the other analogy and we're just going to take this however it goes, was I was thinking of Dwayne Wade and the big three when he was in Miami, that was that like big vision. And if it didn't work, then they would break it up. Well, they won a bunch of championships and it worked. And if it hadn't worked, well, everybody would have been like, great, I'd probably retire because why am I going to play with LeBron James and Chris Bosh? By the way, the tie into that for everybody listening at home is Dwayne Wade went to Marquette. There's a reason why I brought that up. Thoughts on that? That wasn't really a question, but what do you take from that?
Wow. Boy, I'm not sure where to go there. You gave me like 4 or 5. Which one of those paths do you want to go down? Which one of those is the most intriguing? I could go down any of those.
Let's talk about the board first. I think that's like the cool piece because people have challenges sometimes getting that big picture vision or conversely, that communication with the board. So we'll go there.
Yeah. I think the first thing you got to do is you got to realize that we had to sell them the vision, right? So we went in and we made a pitch, and it was myself and Neil Hunter, who's one of the Cree founders who ended up leading this project. We took the prototype into a board meeting. We made everyone else leave the room. We said, we want to show you something. And we just went up and we said, come on up. And we flipped it on and we said, what do you think? And so we did, I think, a pretty good job of recognizing that an LED light bulb at that time didn't exist yet. And everyone kind of knew it was the holy grail, right? I mean, just think about it. You said a light bulb moment. For 100 years, generations believed that the symbol of a good idea is an incandescent light bulb. And we had a better version of an incandescent light. I mean, and so many different levels, the product, well, by the way, that's one of the challenges of the product, but that was also one of the magics of it, right? The light goes on and literally everyone's like, I get it. The other thing was the board at that point in the company's history had been really built with very independent, but very experienced leaders. So there was we were very intentional about building a board over time. When I say we, as a CEO and the chairman, I had to say, but honestly, the independent directors had to really drive this process. So I was totally comfortable with that. But we all agreed we were going to try to be in the innovation business. So we wanted people that had different experiences, but were comfortable doing this. And so, look, if you've built Lowe's Home Improvement into a really successful company, you've taken plenty of risks. I wasn't going to scare him. One of the other members of my board had ran GSK, right? So it built, it took it from Glaxo to Glaxo Wellcome to making it part of GSK. Okay, these guys they had seen things and done things that they had the benefit of. I've been here and I've had to take that risk. And I think so often what happens with boards is they think their job is governance or, to keep an eye on management. And they do need to do that. But this board we're here to try to help the shareholders be really successful. And there's no reward without risk. And so I think that moment was when we realized that we had built a board and they were all incredibly helpful in that process. But I'll be honest, as a CEO, I was probably in year 11 of my CEO tenure at that point. For the first, call it 7-8 years, I would have never put that in front of my board. It took me a long time to be, as a leader, to be comfortable enough to actually trust them to be a part of that decision process. Early on, I did what most people do, and I tried to manage the board, and that was frustrating for all of us.
I mean, you mentioned the word trust, and obviously there's the experience. Was there a moment where you learned how to play the game? Was there somebody either in your life or the board or just an experience that was basically okay, you gave into the process or anything that led to your transformation as a leader to be able to be okay, how do I work with them, not sort of, like you said, manage them?
Yeah, it was actually a couple of those same board members before that time. One day I was very frustrated after a board meeting. So the way it worked is that there was the lead independent director and the chair of the comp committee were two of the people that after the board would meet privately, they'd come and give me feedback. And I was pretty confident. I'd had enough success that I was comfortable saying whatever I was thinking to them. And I remember sitting in my office and saying, this is so frustrating. We're doing all these great things, and I feel like I get into a board meeting and we're going in the wrong direction. We're doing this. And at one point they finally said, have you ever thought about how you manage your relationship with the board? And I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you guys have gotten customers, you've turned on markets, you've done all these things. Do you put the same effort into the relationship with the board members that you do when you're trying to have an important customer? I was like, well, no. And they said, and when the board gets off track, do you think you're putting them on track? And I said, well, I'm trying to. They said, I'm not sure about that. And so we had this really interesting conversation, which was basically a constructive way for me to look in the mirror and realize that the difference between my relationship with the board before and after that moment was me. And it was me assuming that, one, I needed to do the work to make that relationship. And so what I started doing is I never surprised the board after that. I was making sure my board meetings were the end of the process, not the beginning of the conversation. So I took a lot of time to have one-on-ones with them, update them as things went along. I mean, part of it is just making them part of the process. The other thing I was taught was is to start the meeting by telling them what's going as planned, what's not going as planned, and what's keeping you up at night. And so basically put everything on the table in a private session. And this actually came from one of the board members, and it was an amazing transformation. Instead of trying to manage what they were thinking, tell them what I'm thinking and let them be part of helping me. And it seems so logical, but almost no. I mean, I sit on 4 other boards. That is not what normally happens. And it was literally one of the other board members said, look, I used to be frustrated too. I tried this. And I literally just tried it. And from that moment forward, my board meetings changed. And by the way, we also now stayed on topic because those conversations set the agenda for the conversation. And it allowed them to be engaged and help. It was just, it was all about me, but it was an amazing transformation, and one that, really, I probably would have not made it as long as I did. I would have gotten too frustrated if they hadn't helped me see that.
Yeah, I'm smiling because it is one of those moments that are like, it's intuitive but falsely intuitive, and like just that one thing, be like, oh wait, everything lives with how I do things. To change the course of your career, it changed the course of the innovation, it changed the course of how you guys were able, sounds like, accomplish things, and it actually transformed your ability to do your job successfully and how the work occurred to you. Because instead of it being like, oh, like things are reacting, and it's actually no, everything is happening because I created the conditions for that to happen. And so by changing yourself, you were able to foster the innovation at your board level just by sort of greasing the wheels in communication. I don't know if that's...
If you think about it this way, right? I was frustrated they didn't get it. Well, that means I didn't help them get it. Like that's on me, right? And it's like, I always tell people, when people try to sell new technology, they often go out and say, I told them all these great features and they don't want them. I said, because people don't care about features. They care about benefits. Yeah. What makes it relevant to them? And that, look, I knew how to do that. I did that instinctively in my job, but I never thought about that in terms of my relationship with the board. And so that it turned into being a great moment. It helped me a lot as a leader. And honestly, that same approach applied to my own team. But what was interesting is I had started doing that with my team far earlier than my board. For whatever reason, I had created these boundary conditions about what this relationship was going to look like. And I was in my own way. Yeah.
And it's funny how we approach some things a certain way and we approach other things another way, and we think that they're not exactly the same. And we apply the constraints on ourselves. So let's go back to invention versus innovation. And then maybe we can tie it back into your book. What are the differences between the two, and how did those things fight each other, if that's the case?
Yeah, look, so invention is something new, and innovation is something new that solves a problem and creates value.
So like features and benefits?
So when I say solves a problem, so imagine that. So the U.S. Patent Office today has over 10 million registered inventions. But very few of those have gone on to become innovations because someone didn't do the work to solve a problem and create value. And so why do I bring that up? Because honestly, inventing something new is relatively easy. Like, it's not the hard part. Convincing someone to embrace it, so one, understanding a problem that needs to be solved and then solving in a way that the customer sees value, that's really hard. And so I clarified that in the book and in my work, because what I realized is when most people talk about innovation, they're talking about just doing something new. But the way you change markets and disrupt industries, what I call innovation, that's about getting people's behavior to change. It's a very different problem and gets into the psychology of why people think a certain way. And so yes, it gets into benefits over features, but it also gets into, reframing things in a way that's good for them. It's learning to show someone why it's good for them, not telling them, right? People don't respond well to being talked to, but they respond well to being able to see something. It's the idea that we got into at one point where you realize that the customer can't tell you what to do. So most companies go out and ask the customers what to do. If you want to do innovation, it won't work. You can't ask the customer to describe something that they don't know. It isn't possible. It doesn't. And if you think about it logically, we're surprised when we go do that. Now you can talk to the customer, but what you got to find out is not what they want you to do. You got to figure out what problem they have, and then figure out how to go solve. But this idea that they can't ask for it, the majority of companies cannot do this, because they're trained to do what the customer says. And if you look at it, companies that follow the customer down that path eventually hit a wall and are surprised when someone comes up with something new and the customer never asked for it.
Yeah, like a faster horse.
Yeah, that would be Henry Ford's old quote. Yep. If he said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. But if you think about it, so why did he do it? Because he understood that what they really wanted was transportation. Look, it happened when we first had an LED light bulb idea. We did consumer testing and we asked them what they thought. And what they said is, if you gave us a new light bulb, as long as it's cheaper, we'll buy it. So, but what happens if it lasts longer? No, I don't really care about that. What happens if it uses less energy? I don't care about that. Just want a cheaper one. Well, what would it get you to care about these other things? Honestly, I don't care. So what we learned is customers only wanted a cheaper light bulb. And the only other thing we learned in our surveys was they were apathetic about lighting. They actually just didn't care at all. Okay, well, that's an interesting marketing problem. So what we had to do is figure out, one, how to make them care. And the aha is that we'd been telling people we're going to save them energy and then they're going to last longer. Those are the features. When we figured out we were going to save them money and that they would feel pretty stupid if they kept buying this old thing that wasted them a lot of money, they were going to change. It all flipped around. And so if you actually look at our original ad campaign for the Cree LED bulb, it's not a lot about the product. It's how basically if you're still using that old light bulb, it's kind of a really dumb decision. Like you're wasting if you want to waste your own money, go ahead. And it was purposely intended to solve that one problem.
I love that. Well, I think it's just so appropriate, and I'd be remiss if I didn't translate it to what we're doing right now. But I think that what is so great is that you've dealt with this problem, 25 years, and it's exactly the same. It's just about how your application is, how your systems and processes are, how your people are set up. Are you set up to deliver a faster horse, or are you set up to tell people that if they do something else than what you're selling them, then they're wasting their money and they're making a dumb decision?
Yeah, and by the way, and I want to be clear, most organizations are in the faster horse business, and that's okay. That's what they're good at. And honestly, finding people good at that, those are very successful enterprises doing that, right? I do want to caution, innovation is not the answer to every problem. In fact, innovation should be pursued when you have the right conditions. And too often what I find is people think it's like, hey, I don't know what else to do. Let's say we're going to innovate. And that almost never works. It's why it's become this buzzword that no one knows what it really means. In fact, I saw an article the other day, which actually said that most people connotate innovation with working extra hard, not getting any results, and probably losing some jobs. Crises are a great time for innovation because all of a sudden, everyone's really open to change. And at the end of the day, the hardest part about driving innovation is you're going to have to change and you're going to have to convince others to change. When I say others, not only in your own organization, but in the market. Normally, people are wired to resist change. And so the upside of this pandemic that is obviously causing a lot of people trouble around the world is this is a moment where you can drive change so much faster. So I told people the last chapter of my book is actually Don't Waste a Crisis. I had no idea I was going to be talking about one because I finished the book over a year ago. But it is this moment that allows really the human dynamic to change that I think is important for people to understand and recognize that it's an opportunity.
Yeah, so long as it's appropriate, that you have the right conditions to do it, and then you don't do it at the risk, and I guess it's maybe a calculated risk, at the risk of something else, not just to create a new paradigm, but to really take an innovation and really drive it forward successfully if it's right.
Understand, innovation there's more failure than success along the way. That is actually how you learn. I mean, so when I talk to people that have had a lot of success, not just within Cree, but in the other companies I've had a chance to get to know as writing the book, when you ask them what their biggest failure is, what they describe are their biggest learnings. So they have no problem describing tons of them, but they've learned something. And what you realize is if you're going to set out to do something that's never been done before, you can't know how to get there. It's never been done before. You have an idea, what I like to call you have to be directionally correct. Take your best idea and you try it. And then you're going to learn something, and it might work and it might not work. But either way, you have more information to guide the next step of the process. It's this iteration. It's this journey that you're on. And I think if you're not comfortable with the fact that you're going to fail a bunch of times along the way, and you're not comfortable with the fact that you might actually end up doing a lot of work and it not working at all, you can't do it. And so what happens in most organizations is I always hear this, I'd like to balance the risk reward. It don't work that way. Like, it's, if you've ever been to meet your financial advisor, right? You want to invest in the market. How much risk do you want to take? The risk you're willing to take is a function of the potential returns. It's just math. And it's been going on forever. And while there are cycles, it really is just the math. Innovation's the same thing. If you want to really innovate, you're going to take some big risk and you're likely going to have some big failures.
And you got to be willing to do it.
Yeah, and the way I would say is one of the ways you reframe that is most people sit where we're at today and they ask, what could go wrong if I do this? What you start to realize is you learn to ask the question, what happens if I don't do this? And if you really can get yourself in that frame of mind, that kind of that different context, it really makes it a much It just changes the whole dynamic of how you go about it.
That's awesome. I totally get that. And I don't think I've ever smiled so much in an interview because everything you're saying is just so like, it's like one of those things that can break, that has the potential to break everything open when you get it right. And if you want to go down that path, and then there's the risk of it. And so it's just, I guess it depends on what kind of person you are. If you're listening to this and talking about innovation, you might be cringing, or you might be just like salivating saying, all right, let's go. Let's see how we can do this. So if you are interested in learning more about innovation, Chuck, tell us where we can get a hold of you, where we can connect, where we can learn more about your book and some of the other stuff that you're doing.
So all the stuff I'm doing, you can find on my website at chuckswoboda.com. I'm also a regular contributor on Forbes, pretty active on LinkedIn. You can follow me on social at the Chuck Swoboda on Twitter and Instagram. And I also have a podcast called Innovators on Tap that I do, where I actually interview other people who are innovators. And it's really about the mindset. So these ideas we talked about, if you're interested in why people think a certain way and what that thinking is different, that's what I've spent the last year working on. And I honestly wish I would have had the podcast for a year before I wrote the book, because it's confirmed a lot of things, but I could explain the stories even better now, because what you find is that, and it doesn't, by the way, innovation is not reserved just for tech people anywhere. And it's been really eye-opening to meet a lot of really incredible people at all different places. So please feel free to reach out. Obviously, the book's available, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you want to buy books.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chuck. It's been a blast. I'm just so excited to follow more of your writings. And in a world that has big problems, we need more people to have being innovations, not inventions, to see them and bring them to light. So just appreciate you giving your time today. And it's been, like I said, it's been a blast. Thank you.
Well, it's been a lot of fun being here. Thanks for having me.
My guest today is Chuck Swoboda, so SWOBODA, if you want to follow him online. He's the president of Cape Point Advisors. He's the innovator in residence at Marquette University and the author of The Innovator's Spirit, Discover the Mindset to Pursue the Impossible. So if you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe. If you have somebody in your life or you want your team to be more innovative, be sure to send them this podcast. And I just hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I hope it helps you become a better leader and a better runner of organizations. So my name is Anthony Taylor, and I look forward to sharing with you next time. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. If you're in the process of renewing your strategic plan and you're looking for a framework to align your team and to create a clear vision, clear goals, and a clear roadmap on how to get there, be sure to check out our signature course that will walk you through the process that we've used to create hundreds of strategic plans successfully for organizations all over the world. You'll get instant access to all the videos and documents right away. And so whether you're planning a strategy session in 3 months, 3 weeks, or 3 days, you'll be able to get the most out of your meeting and have everyone be on the same page and bought into your plan. It's the exact same framework that we've used for our clients, and we've packaged it in a way that you can use it easily yourself. So visit SMEstrategy.net/course, and you can use the code podcast for $100 off. That's SMEstrategy.net/course. and use the code podcast for $100 off, and you'll get instant access to all of the tools to help you create your strategic plan successfully and have everybody moving forward on the same page. Once again, this is Anthony Taylor with the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you real soon.